Good evening, everyone. And you know, it's about time we have these discussions. Before I go any further, I'd like to thank the seniors in the room for paving the way so I can be here in this capacity, representing not only my community but also the police officers. I'd like to also commend the youth that are in this room because they're the future, and we're glad they're here to share their voice. On behalf of Commissioner Evans and the men and women of the Boston Police Department, we're here to have these tough discussions that we promised. We're here to have dialogue. Positive dialogue equals positive change. All right? Many of you in this room, especially the seniors, you really have gone through some tough times in your lives again, so we could be here in this capacity, and I could be here as well. Today, here with us being the Boston Police Department, we'll have Superintendent Bobby Myrna, who is the Bureau Chief of the Bureau of Investigative Services. Also, we have Deputy Brown here somewhere, John Brown, who is the Deputy Chief of the Homicide Division. We also have Superintendent Randall Halstead here. He is our Night Commander, and we have Deputy Nora Bastion here as well, who's one of our experts in the community policing. Again, before I close, I'd like to commend Reverend Brown, our elected officials, and our community stakeholders for convening this, especially you, Reverend Brown, after we saw Selma. Everyone should see that movie. He stated that we have to come back to the community and have this tough discussion about officer-involved shootings. All right? You need that education. I'd rather you receive this education about what goes on than somebody that's just talking from Greater Boston. We all saw those protesting, right? They're not from here. And you should know from the men right here, right? Not from someone on the street saying they said, not from stereotypical views from years gone by. We're here now to answer these questions and to provide an education as to what happens in officer-involved shootings. And let this not be the last discussion or forum. You know, it's high time we had these dialogues, so let's continue, especially with the youth in the room. I'd like to end by giving the youth a hand.
All right, it's time for the presentation. I'm going to ask one thing, and that is allow both gentlemen to be able to make their presentations from start to finish. And then after that, we'll have reactions from our youth, and then those of us who'd like to have reactions, comments, or questions, use microphones to my right and to my left. I'm going to ask Robert Myrna to come first. He is the head of the Bureau of Investigative Service for the Boston Police Department. Give him a hand.
Just real brief, I want to thank everybody for having me here tonight. I'll give you a little bit of history. This is my 29th year in the Boston Police Department. I started out here as a patrolman here in Area B2 in Roxbury. I grew up in Mission Hill section of the city, lived there my whole life. And then when I made detective, I went to the Youth Violence Strike Force. I had the opportunity to go work up in the homicide unit as a detective. I got promoted to sergeant. I went back to Area B2 in Roxbury. I made sergeant detective. I got the opportunity to go back and work in the homicide unit. I got promoted to lieutenant. I got to go back and work at Area B2 in Roxbury. I made lieutenant detective and then went back to the homicide unit as the commander. I grew up in Mission Hill, so I have a son that's on the job. He said to me one day recently at the headquarters at the cafeteria, geez, it's really great, you know, you're the superintendent of investigative services in the Boston Police Department. I said, yeah, look at me, 56 years old, but I've made it exactly 500 feet. So I'm a resident of Boston lifelong. I take this very seriously. I know most of the folks in the room here. I've worked very close with the District Attorney Dan Conley over the years, with Dan Mulhern, with Reverend Brown, with Reverend Scott, and many others here. So part of what I'm going to just talk about, and there's a lot of slides, but we'll go through them very quickly. It's two parts. The first thing is the investigation that takes place when an officer discharges his weapon, what they can expect, what you as the public can expect in an investigation, and then ultimately we'll get into what happens with our investigation from there. They're independent bodies. Besides the firearm discharge investigation that takes place, there's a parallel investigation that goes on by the Internal Affairs Division. What we do is the criminal end, working under the umbrella of the Boston Police Department as well as the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office. So with that, we can hit it again. The firearm discharge investigation team was put together about 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago, by a number of investigators that wanted to make sure that there's no investigation that receives more attention than a homicide investigation in this city. However, police shootings, as we've seen, and the DA will go into the numbers and so on in his presentation, police shootings receive more scrutiny than any other investigation, not only in this city, across the country. So we thoroughly investigate all discharges while maintaining focus on the rights of the officer, the integrity of the department, and the trust of the public. And I think that's what we're here about, to make sure that the public trusts that the investigation that they're getting from the Boston Police Department and the decisions that are made by the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office is done in a manner that they can be comfortable with and that they can respect. What we did was we organized a team of highly skilled investigators, and just so you know, a lot of the folks originally came from the homicide unit, and then we picked supervisors and detectives from across the city who were selected not only by the police commissioner, but with the consent of the district attorney's office, the most highly skilled investigators who have the sole responsibility of investigating these firearm discharges, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it's not just 8, 10, 12. We have over 50 investigators assigned to the firearm discharge investigation team, so that at any given time we can have supervisors, detectives, and response teams come out. We have two types of teams. We have a blue team, which comes out when we have either an unintentional discharge or a discharge that does not cause any type of death or serious bodily injury. That means that there was some type of exchange of gunfire by the police and an assailant. Officer could be chasing a suspect, climbing a fence. His firearm is discharged unintentionally. No one is struck. No one is injured. No serious property damage. There's a small team that comes out and does that investigation. The most important one, and the one that we'll be here to talk about mostly, is the we can hit it again. Is the red team. The red team responds to all firearm discharges resulting in death or injury, or where discharges are deemed to be a violation of criminal law. So if there's an intentional discharge, that's a violation of law. If someone is struck when an officer fires a gun, or someone is struck and killed when an officer fires a gun. The makeup of the team is kind of important. So this isn't done, as you'll hear, and I'm just going to grab this so I can speak. The makeup of the team, so that it isn't kind of this frenzy, and I think some of what you've seen across the country is that there isn't a system in place. This isn't a new system. This isn't something that's been thrown together. This is a system that's been in place for over 10 years. There's a crime scene team that is led by a sergeant detective who runs everything to do with dealing with the crime scene. And I know Chief Gross introduced Deputy Superintendent Randall Halstead. Randy was one of the original members of the fitted team when we put the team together. He's got over 39 years experience?
36.
36 years experience, but Randy ran the crime scene team on the fitted team for many years, and there's none better, and he's trained the folks that have come behind him. We have an interview team, which at the time, the original, when Randy was running the crime scene team, was my responsibility, and that's a team that deals with anything to do with talking to a person, whether it's knocking on doors, making sure that every single house, vehicle, bus, truck driver, business, that if there's teams of officers that go out and make sure that anybody that heard something, saw something, was in the vicinity at the time of the shooting is spoken to. Every one of those statements is memorialized, and if it's someone that is a recipient witness or a witness to this entire incident, they're brought in, they're audio taped at that time, and now they're videotaped. There's an intelligence team that takes place at headquarters, so if there were a shootout with suspects, or if there's folks that have fled the scene, or vehicles that have fled the scene, they're already working on that separately, so that the investigators on the ground do not have to deal with running car plates and so on and so forth. That's all being done simultaneously. And then there's an organization team at headquarters that immediately starts putting together two files. One is the paper file, as we start taking CAD sheets, which are our computer-aided dispatch sheets, which officers are on scene, any type of information starts in a paper file, and we immediately start an electronic file for whether it's videos, photographs, anything that's done in an electronic file. So it's done simultaneously on any time there's one of these teams. And I won't get into it, the DA will get into it, but at the same time that there's a police response, there's a senior prosecutor from the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office that's notified as part of this whole red team notification that comes out to the scene. We also have all of our technical services available to us in the Boston Police Department. We have additional investigators if for some reason one of those team leaders isn't available. Dozens of other reserve detectives, so that if we need, depending on what the situation is, there's more people to be talked to, more video to be gathered, we can plug those folks in. And then we have our technical services department, our forensic group in the Boston Police Department. So that you know, our crime lab and our latent print unit are all civilian scientists. These are folks, we both, our crime lab and our latent print unit, are fully accredited ASCLD labs. These folks are scientists, they're not sworn police officers. Our firearms analysis unit is a mixed unit between sworn and civilian. And again, these folks are trained in their particular science. I won't go through all of the list, but you folks have probably witnessed some crime scenes. These are all of the, at a minimum, these duties are being done by the crime scene team. The collection of evidence, the preservation of evidence, the things that can't be moved, touched, photographed, everything's videotaped, so that that scene is in the condition short of not being there at the time that it went down. We can keep moving just a little bit. The interview team I touched on a little bit. Every single person that has any bit of information on this team is touched on. And that means, and I don't know if any folks in this room have ever had it done, we knock on the door, excuse me, did you hear shots? Did you hear any noise? Did you hear any cars scream? Did you hear any yelling? Did you hear anything being said? Every single person that's within earshot, eye shot, or any distance of that shooting scene, they're going to get a knock on their door. Same thing with the organizational team. They're pulling together all of the paperwork, the 9/11 calls, and one of the things that folks don't realize, when the Boston Police gets a 9/11 call, we don't generally get one call. So you may get a call that says, yeah, we have shots fired, and then they start the police rolling. But many times, multiple people call, and when we pull those tapes apart, there's little tidbits of information that gets sent along the way. So if you're calling from one end of the street, you're seeing one thing. You may see folks arriving to a scene or coming up to a shooting. If you're calling from another end of the street, you may see folks fleeing the scene. So we take all of those tapes. They're all preserved. They're all sat down, listened to, and all of that information is pulled apart in the investigation. We can hit it one more time. Sorry. What we operate in the Boston Police Department is our Rule 303, which is our use of deadly force, where we have the ability to fire our weapon. And in Section 11, our firearm discharge team has the sole responsibility for investigating firearm discharges involving the members of the Boston Police Department. And then the lead investigator will submit a 5-day preliminary report, and then ultimately a final report that goes to the District Attorney's Office, independent, with recommendations, justification for the use of force, whether it was accidental or unintentional, whether it caused death, personal injury, or any damage to personal property. The Suffolk County District Attorney and DA Conley will speak of that. He gets a copy of our final report, which, and I won't steal the DA's thunder, but that's a very lengthy, detailed, hundreds of documents that his office and his senior staff goes through, and they'll decide on criminality or not. We can click through some of this. I just want to get to the section where we talk about what the officers can expect, what the officers do at the scene. But the purpose of the firearm discharge investigation team, it's not the administrative function. We're not looking to see if they took proper cover, if they had enough ammunition in their weapon, the same amount they're supposed to have, whether their gun was oiled or cleaned or anything like that. Our job is one thing, to see if what the officer did was criminal conduct. It's a criminal investigation, just like if it was two civilians on the street. So we're conducting a criminal investigation. And if we can get up to where we talk about what the officers can expect from us, and click up a little bit, sorry. Some of this is stuff that we use to train the officers as well as to what they can expect. A little more. Where it says officer, what the officer can expect. Yeah. Okay, that's good. So if you discharge your weapon or are present during the discharge, they have to report it immediately. And if they were not the discharging officer, everybody stays at the scene. They don't leave the scene unless medically necessary. That means if somebody got injured during the pursuit. And we don't move anything. We don't move cruisers. We don't move civilian cars. Everything stays in that scene as is when we get there. They don't collect evidence. Nobody touches any ballistic evidence, cartridge casings, weapons on the ground, whatever it happens to be. Unless for some reason there's a risk of destruction. That would be that, you know, there's a weapon there, there's folks that someone could move it, someone could take it, and there's not enough personnel at the beginning of the scene to preserve it. And then they have to note and report there's any type of movement. I had to move that cruiser because the ambulance had to come in and take away an injured party or something like that. All of it is documented. When prudent to do so, we transfer all of our firearms immediately to a superior officer. That superior officer does nothing but maintain that firearm until our firearms analysis unit ballistician comes to the scene. We don't take the magazine out, we don't clear the firearm, nothing is touched, it's kept intact. We transfer any other weapons that you have on you. That means your ammunition pouches, your stick, your mace, whatever the officer may have on his person at the time. And all firearms are inspected and inventoried by the firearms analysis unit, and we videotape and photograph that procedure as it's going on at the scene. Weapons that are determined not to have been discharged, and that's done by a firearms analysis person at the scene, are returned after inspection so that we know which officer, each officer that fired, and that inspection is counting ammunition, seeing what rounds are left in the firearm, etc. Discharged weapons are immediately transferred to our firearm analysis unit, and the only time a weapon that was discharged gets returned to the officer at the end of an investigation is on a letter by the police commissioner after consultation with the firearm discharge team. This is some of the important stuff. If an officer discharges, he will be interviewed on tape with representation, with a lawyer. Again, this is a criminal investigation. No sooner than 24 hours after discharge, and preferably within 72 hours. The only change in that is if the officer is actually hit or struck during this shooting scene and he's hospitalized, and then we can adjust for the time. No written report is required. We do a videotaped interview of the officer in the discharge the same way we do videotaped interviews of civilians that discharge weapons on the street. There's no immunity. We don't say, okay, tell us the question, tell us some answers. We won't use this against you criminally, but we can use it administratively. You either, and you're read Miranda. They fill out a form. They're read Miranda. They read their Miranda warnings, and their statements have to be voluntary, just like every other citizen. They'll be interviewed on tape before the end of the tour of duty if they're present, and not the discharging officer. Before the end of the tour of duty, they're interviewed on tape. They will not give a written report. They will give a videotaped interview. They will not be given Miranda or asked to execute a waiver. And every other officer that responds to that scene, for any reason, will submit a Form 26, which is one of our administrative reports on everything they did in the scene. And that could include just the officer that blocked off traffic at the end of the street. He's going to say, I was there, I put crime scene tape up, I blocked off traffic on Dudley Street. The investigation team establishes and protects the scene. We set up all the perimeters. We separate witnesses. We deal with the incident commander of the firearm team. We canvass every building that's within eyesight, air sight, anything else, and no investigative information from that scene goes to anyone else in the police department other than the fitted team. It stays within the fitted team. And again, the district attorney will talk about some of that. These are things that at a minimum are done at all our firearm discharge investigation teams, and I'm not going to go through them, but we try and cover every single aspect of questioning, filming, videotaping, processing that we do at any criminal scene. So we have a number of, you've seen up there on the board, 8, 10 checklists. Each one of those team leaders, whether it's the crime scene team, the interview team, the organizational team, have checklists that must be followed and adhered to and becomes part of the permanent file on the fitted team. And again, I'll hold for questions until after the district attorney's presentation. I'm sure you have some. I went through it a little quick, but I can, between myself, Deputy Brown, we can answer any questions, Superintendent Halstead, that you have relative to the firearm discharge team. But this isn't something that's done kind of ad hoc, and whoever happens to be working that night runs police shooting investigations. This is the way it's been done in Boston for over 10 years. This is a model that's been copied by other police departments in this state, as well as across the country. Folks have come in, copied our model of firearm discharge investigation team, how we do business, and it's been used as one of the best police practices in many communities across the country. And without further ado, I'll introduce Suffolk County District Attorney Dan Conley.